everyone. My name is Dennis Oskinek. I'm here with Variance Creative Studios, currently doing development of Sky Labyrinth, and today we will be working on a tutorial, rather not working on it, I already did it, but showing a tutorial on the depth of field effects that we added to our game late last week. While depth of field in and of itself is a very straightforward thing that does not need its own tutorial, the specifics of what we did with it were a little bit complicated and took a while to figure out, so we figured we might as well make a tutorial since there wasn't much content on how to do this, at least that I can find. So I hope it's useful and interesting to somebody out there on the internet. So without further ado, here we have our scene of the game, and you can see all like the tutorial panels and stuff that disappear once you play the game. So the original setup when we added the depth of field was a main camera and a perspective camera for the user interface, the heads-up display. These were separate. And so originally we added the depth of field here, you can see down here, to the main camera. And what this did is, you can probably tell, but the UI is in the way if we play. This adds a blur to everything but the player, because we have set the focus on transform to the player transform. Now this depth of field is actually only enabled when you rotate and when you wall flip, but that setup comes later. For right now, it's just enabled always, and this is basically just to demonstrate what the original setup was. And so the issue with this is the depth of field does not get applied to the user interface, which is not cool. We want the entire world, the entire scene, including the UI, to blur except the player when they rotate and wall flip. And so this is the tricky part. Reading a bunch of like threads and watching some example YouTube videos and stuff, a lot of them suggested, oh, just throw the depth of field on the UI camera, set its culling mask to whatever you want, and then presto bingo, Bob's your uncle. But unfortunately that doesn't exactly work. So if we remove the depth of field from the main camera and add it here, so we do get a blur on the entire scene, including the UI. And if we set our focus on transform to the player and play, you can see that the player is still blurred. The entire scene's blurred. And that's because the culling mask includes the player for the UI camera. So let's just turn that off. See what happens. Wait a minute, the player's still blurred. The issue is basically the order in which things get rendered. So the main camera has a depth of -1, whereas the UI camera has a depth of 1. It could be 0. It's choose the same thing. The issue is the UI stuff gets rendered after the main camera stuff. That's how you get the UI on top of the world. That's how you get a heads-up display. So the problem is if apply the depth of field to the UI camera, which is drawn after the main camera, the player is going to be blurry no matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you set the focus on transform to the player. It doesn't matter if you cull out the player from the mask. It doesn't matter if you cull him out from the main camera. He's always going to be blurry because you're applying the depth of field to the UI camera, which is the last thing that gets drawn after the main camera. So faced with this problem, I did a bunch of research and read a bunch of threads and couldn't really find a solution. And so basically I gave up and just tried a bunch of shit on my own and found out a thing that worked. So the trick is twofold. One, the UI camera needs to follow the main camera. Previous to this implementation of the latest beta release, the UI camera didn't do that. It didn't follow the main camera. It was the position wasn't changed. The UI was just drawn on top of the world always, and the position never moves from wherever it is right now. I don't know where it is in world space. Where's it transform? It's at 0, 50, negative 10, so that's where it stayed. So the first step of the solution is to have the camera always follow the main camera. And to do that, we just do a simple parenting. We parent the UI camera to the main camera. So the UI is a child of the main camera. That's the first step. The second step is to remove the depth of field from the UI camera and add it back to the main camera. And set the focus on transform to be the player. So right now, the UI camera is going to be following the main camera around, and the depth of field blur is going to apply to everything but the UI. So it's going to apply and the player. So as you can see here, it applies to the player, or it applies to the entire scene but the player, rather, but not the UI, which isn't quite what we want. So the trick is to add the player to the culling mask of the UI perspective camera. And then, oh, I think I might have gotten this backwards. Yeah, I got it backwards. So it's a good thing I saved off this, the prefab of the actual setup. I got it backwards. So the depth of field should be on the UI perspective camera. Memory's a bit faulty. Yeah, the main camera has just the smooth follow. The UI camera has the depth of field. Okay, right. So let me correct myself. So the trick here is child the perspective camera to the parent of the main camera, so that it follows the main camera around. Set the culling mask of the UI camera to the UI and the player, and then attach a depth of field script that focuses on nothing, I believe. Maybe it might need to focus on the player. What are you complaining about? Player controller. Probably the camera reference got wiped when I did all this. Yep, that's exactly what happened. Okay, so that console error that we just saw over here, this is the player class complaining that I hadn't assigned the depth of field component of the UI perspective camera to the player class, which is what handles rendering the depth of field effect only at rotations and wall flips. And because I had just deleted the depth of field script off of the UI perspective camera, that reference was wiped in the inspector, so I just had to reset it. Anyways, so if we play, nothing happens, but you can see here the entire world's being blurred. The UI is not being blurred. What's going wrong with this setup? I almost feel compelled to just drag this prefab back in and work with that. That would be cheating. Oh, is it not set to near blur? And the aperture is a little high, but that shouldn't matter. Oh, the main camera still has a depth of field. Maybe that was the issue? Oh, the main. Why doesn't the main camera have a smooth follow script? I don't know how that got deleted. Target the player. It's a good thing we saved off that transform. Otherwise we have to redo all this. 2, 1, 4. Was it 10? No. That's weird. Nailed it. I don't know why the smooth follow got deleted. So anyway, you can see right here that no depth of field is being applied because we're not rotating, but every time we do rotate, you can see that the scene gets blurred, including the player, it looks like, which is not quite what we want. I think we need to set the focus on transform. Yeah, forgot to do that. Okay. I'll go over everything again once I confirm that it's working the way it's supposed to. Yeah, okay, so you can see here the entire scene gets blurred, sans the player, including the UI, which is perfectly what we want. So, to recap, you child the UI perspective camera, you parent the UI perspective camera rather to the main camera so that it's the child of the main camera and follows it around. You set the culling mask to both call UI and player, or rather draw UI and player and call everything else. And then you attach a depth of field script, which is just part of the standard assets provided by Unity, and have it focus on the transform that you don't want to blur, in this case the player. So what this does is the UI perspective camera follows the main camera around, which is the only way that this actually works properly, and draws a blurred scene, because remember, because the depth is the one that gets drawn last, draws a blurred scene of everything being blurred, sans the player. And the sans the player part is handled by the depth of field script with the focus on transform variable. So this way, your user interface gets blurred at the same time the rest of the scene does. And then, like I said earlier, the player class, the player controller class that had thrown that reference not assigned exception earlier, that's what actually handles blurring at the right time during like a rotation or a wall flip. What are you complaining about now? Deleting like the camera scripts probably messed up a bunch of different things. In the end, that's what source control is for. I'm probably just gonna drop all the changes that I've made during this tutorial so that everything works properly. In fact, let's just do that now so I can show you the properly working example. Yes, let's reload that scene. We reloaded. So yeah, this is the end result. Every time we rotate, there we go. Or wall flip, the entire scene but the player is blurred, including the user interface. Originally, the user interface wasn't being blurred, and we thought it was fine, but we thought it would look cool, really cool, if it was blurred alongside everything else. It sort of stuck out like a sore thumb, the UI, when it wasn't being blurred. You had like an entire scene that was being blurred, and then these numbers on the left and right that just looks very sharp, and they stuck out because of the contrast. So anyway, that's a very messy version, very messy explanation of how to do this. Probably should have practiced this ahead of time, but whatever. Basically, the summary, for those just joining, is when you want to blur a user interface and a scene, but not blur certain parts of the scene, what you have to do is parent your UI camera, in this case a UI perspective camera. For 2D games it'll be a UI orthographic camera, to the main camera, so that it follows it around in world space. And then you need to attach the depth of field to the UI camera instead of the main camera, and set the focus on whatever you want not to be blurred. And then the most important step is you have to properly assign the culling mask, so that it only draws the things that you want to be blurred. It does not draw everything, or it doesn't redraw everything, rather. Like the main camera is already drawing everything but the user interface, and then the user interface handles drawing just the user interface, but for this depth of field effect it also has to redraw the player. So I mean, if we set this camera's culling mask to everything would still work the same way it does in terms of this depth of field script, you just lose efficiency because the camera's redrawing everything for essentially no reason. As far as the specifics of how to set the culling mask and how we get the effect of turning it on and off, like turning the depth of field effect on and off when we rotate or wall flip, I could show the code for that real quick, but that's also available online on our GitHub page. It's under, this is the prefabs folder. I think it's under miscellaneous. Maybe not. UI probably. It's probably under heads-up display. Oh, it's in the player class. Let me just throw this to mono develop. Ooh, I want to do that. There we go, nailed it. So over here, it's kind of off center. Why is that? Where are you off centered? Fit the screen? No. Oh, probably because I closed this like side tab. Well, that looks really, really bad. I want to reset as you please. Reset size. That's not what I want. Center. No. I probably have to like redo this source. Super. God damn it, OBS. Why do you have to do this to me? Fit to screen does not do exactly what I want. I don't get why this is like getting cut off. That shows up? Okay. Freaking OBS. Let's just see if reloading mono develop does what we want. Nope. Did that do it? That did it. Hey. So I had closed the solution window in MonoDevelop because I never use it. And apparently OBS needs that solution window to be open because that throws off the reset, this positioning, I guess. I don't know. I think if I close the window and then like recreate my scene in OBS, it'll like properly account for that window not being there, but I don't want to do that because that takes time. So we can just reopen it and that'll be that. Anyway, so here's the player class. Nope, that's the HUD class. Here's the player class. And let's just look at the important parts regarding depth of fields. So here we assign the depth of field component. It's just assigned via the inspector up here, and then we grab the actual component and disable it right away on start, if it's not already disabled. And then down below, whenever we get the input for a rotation or a wall flip, we enable it. At one point I was messing with the aperture, so that like the aperture basically means blurriness. The aperture for a rotation was like heavier than a wall flip or vice versa, but I commented that stuff out. It seems like the aperture being the same works way better. This is the same thing, just for the other rotation, the other direction. When the player is not grounded, we disable the depth of field effect completely, just to ensure that if they're rotating while mid-air, it doesn't enable the depth of field. You are allowed to rotate mid-air, which is useful for like landing exactly where you want and facing the direction you want to be facing. But enabling the depth of field while you're mid-air and rotating makes it really hard to land precisely because it blurs the whole scene, so it's kind of hard to see exactly where you're about to land. So we explicitly disable that if we're not grounded, and then again down here for wall flipping, we enable the depth of fields. And then otherwise, if we are, what is this an else of? If the controller is grounded, here's where we're disabling it if we're not grounded. Up above, where if we are grounded and we have either recently rotated or wall flipped, we're disabling it. So I was slightly mistaken. So this is if the controller is grounded and we just finished wall flipping or rotating, then we disable it so that it's only happens during a rotation, basically. And then down here, else. This is the else clause of if controller.grounded. So this means if we're airborne, explicitly set it to false. I think that's it, yeah. So it's pretty simple. It's basically just setting the dot enabled of the depth of field component on or off whenever we want. And it gets the really nice blur only when we are rotating or wall flipping on everything, including the UI, but the player. Sorry for like the messy explanation at first. It was basically going off memory how I had set it up originally, and memory's not very accurate, I guess. But I think I summarized it really well. All you pretty much need to do is parent the UI camera to the main camera, attach the depth of field to that, and then set the focus on transform to the player. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But unfortunately, nobody else on the internet seems to explain it. And I guess I did a pretty poor job, but I think I summarized it well later. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful. Have a good day.